Welcome, everyone. Today, we're unpacking a genuinely fascinating explainer centered on the writings of Adrian Holman, specifically his publication titled Curses in Verses. Whether you're a theological scholar or just someone who's kind of curious about ancient texts, this framework is absolutely wild to examine. We're going to look closely at Holman's intricate breakdown of the spiritual mechanics behind biblical curses. Now, just to be clear right up front, we aren't here to endorse these theological claims as absolute objective truth. Instead, we're just breaking down his perspective on how these ancient spiritual laws supposedly operate.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the legality of curses, then move right into the blessing of Abraham. From there, we'll outline his 3 rules for vengeance, look at some specific case studies, explore the curse of Cain, and finally wrap things up with claiming the birthright. This agenda is going to guide us through a very complex, multi-layered theological argument about how spiritual mechanics actually function in our daily lives. Section 1. The legality of curses. The human craving for justice.
So, Holman grounds his entire theory not just in ancient texts, but in human nature itself. We all have this deeply ingrained, universal desire to see justice served when we feel we've been wronged, right? So he poses this rather striking question to us. Are curses really legal? Basically, Holman is trying to figure out if there are actual spiritual statutes and rules for using curses properly. He argues that for thousands of years, people have just been using curses completely incorrectly for their own nefarious personal gain. And to him, that implies there must be a legitimate legal way they were originally intended to function.
Just to establish a factual baseline for what we're talking about today, let's look at the dictionary definition. A curse is defined as the expression of a wish that misfortune, evil, doom, etc., befall a person, group, etc. It's an invocation of trouble. But how does one invoke this legally, at least according to Holman?
Well, Holman provides a fantastic, really relatable analogy to explain why a legal spiritual framework is so appealing to people. Think about Marvel movies. Why do we absolutely love the Avengers? Well, it's because they defeat villains who are actively trying to destroy the Earth. Humans inherently crave vengeance when they are wronged. But in the real world, if you take vengeance into your own hands, you go to jail for retaliation or murder. A legal spiritual framework for curses appeals to people because it essentially promises vengeance without all those earthly legal consequences.
Section 2. The blessing of Abraham, the theological foundation.
Holman connects the New Testament straight back to the Old Testament. He specifically states that Jesus taking on the curse of the law in the book of Galatians opens the door for believers to receive ancient promises made all the way back in Genesis. And this brilliantly illustrates his point. Take Genesis 12:3, which states, "And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee." Holman claims this exact biblical text makes God an avenger on our behalf. Vengeance, he argues, is literally built into this ancient promise. You don't have to seek revenge by your own means because the system is designed to just do it for you automatically.
Section 3. 3 rules for vengeance. A strict framework. So how do these mechanics supposedly operate without turning into a messy cycle of personal retaliation? Well, Holman outlines a very specific set of rules. Let's walk through these 3 steps together. First, you have to believe Jesus died for sins. Holman says this is what opens the door to the blessing in the first place. Second, you absolutely cannot provoke others first. The vengeance has to be strictly reactionary. And third, you cannot retaliate. If you retaliate, you void the whole process. Holman actually shares a deeply personal anecdote to illustrate this. He mentions that he is 4'7" tall, and when ignorant people laugh at him in public because of his height, he uses this exact non-retaliatory framework. Instead of lashing out and getting into trouble, he keeps his sanity by relying on this spiritual law, truly believing that the final vengeance is just going to be handled for him.
Let's move to Section 4, Case Studies in Curses, How the Rules Apply. Let's see how this builds out.
Holman provides several specific biblical examples to show us what triggers a curse and what avoids one. To see what brings a curse, he points to the biblical story of Simeon and Levi. They essentially destroyed an entire city in a fit of cruel revenge. Because of that fierce anger, their own father, Jacob, cursed them. Holman extends this by stating we must not strive with someone without a cause. On the flip side, to avoid a curse, you have to respect your parents. His reasoning is that holding a grudge against the people who conceived you is essentially resenting your own existence. And surprisingly, he says you must even respect bad rulers.
Which brings up a really fascinating modern application. Holman cites Exodus 22:28, which explicitly commands us not to curse the ruler of the people. Holman impartially explains that even if a nation's leader is absolutely atrocious, God is the one who brings the counterbalance. He uses a modern political example here, stating that paying an Etsy witch to curse a leader, like President Trump, for example, is completely useless. Why? Because according to Holman's framework, God automatically judges lying and stealing anyway. The curse is already in motion against bad behavior based on divine law, which makes any human-initiated curse completely irrelevant. Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer scale. Notice this massive number, 33 feet and 4 inches. In the book of Zechariah, there is a vision of a flying scroll that acts as a curse sweeping over the earth against thieves and liars. Using biblical cubits, Holman calculates the scroll to be over 33 feet long and 16 feet wide. This brilliantly illustrates the sheer magnitude and the inevitability of a curse entering a thief's house and consuming it entirely. We're talking about a massive, unavoidable spiritual consequence.
Section 5. The Curse of Cain. The Consequences of Murder.
This brings us to Holman's ultimate example of a curse's exponential growth, which is drawn straight from Genesis chapter 4. When Cain murdered his brother Abel, the consequences he faced were multi-layered and incredibly severe. First, the earth itself served as a witness and literally refused to yield crops for Cain. He was then forced to become a wandering fugitive. But notice this very strange promise from God. Anyone who killed Cain would face a sevenfold vengeance. God placed a physical mark on Cain just to protect him from being murdered. Holman points out that this introduces the concept of a curse growing exponentially across the earth.
And here is where Holman's interpretation gets incredibly unique. After receiving this curse, Cain goes on to build the very first city, which he named Enoch. Because a cursed man built the first city, Holman argues that anything he built carried that exact same curse. Therefore, the curse permeates throughout modern urban environments, even today. While violent crime rates might sometimes spike in rural areas, Holman argues that the sheer actual volume of crimes occurring in dense cities today is a direct, lingering result of this curse of Cain, literally embedded in city foundations. So, the crucial point is in Section 6, claiming the birthright, the final takeaway.
How does Holman tie all these ancient mechanics together for the modern reader? Well, it all comes back to obtaining the blessing of Abraham. To really understand the value of this, Holman looks at Genesis 27. In it, Rebekah and Jacob hatch this extreme plot of deception. They actually use sheep's wool on Jacob's arms to trick his blind, dying father Isaac into giving Jacob the spiritual birthright instead of his brother Esau. Holman highlights this to ask us, why on earth would you go to such extreme lengths to trick your own father? Because this spiritual birthright was considered to be of unimaginable value.
And what exactly was the birthright that Isaac passed down? Cursed be everyone that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee. That right there is the core phrase. Holman's overarching belief is that modern readers, through faith, can claim this exact same protective, non-retaliatory birthright for themselves today. If you walk in this framework, you simply don't need to fight back. Your enemies are handled by a spiritual law that blesses those who treat you well and curses those who don't.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. How do you view justice, vengeance, and spiritual birthrights in your own life? We all have that innate human craving to see wrongs made right. Whether you view Holman's framework as literal spiritual physics, or maybe simply as a fascinating psychological tool for maintaining your own peace and avoiding retaliation, it definitely forces us to reflect on how we handle the injustices we face every single day. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and I will see you in the next explainer.